Hi, I'm Art Kaplan, and this is Both Sides Now. Doctors are considered to have a lot of authority and believability in our culture, and I know some are saying, really? We seem to get bashed around a lot, but still, if you look at polls, if you listen to people talk about how they respect their individual physician, their views count. So if you look at what doctors were told to do in the past, they were said to keep your personal opinions to yourself. Don't share personal views about politics or lifestyle or anything. That's just not an appropriate thing for a doctor to do because it might exercise too much influence over the patients on topics that have nothing to do with medicine. But today, doctors more and more, because of social media, are sharing personal opinions on all sorts of topics. Topics from politics to health reform, to endorsing certain ideas about healthcare, and actually all the way over to the personal hygiene products they might like or use. I saw a recent Glamour magazine article that shared the best eye creams according to medical students. 10 students and residents, many who were already running their own health and beauty blogs, told what they used and what they liked about individual brand name over-the-counter products. We couldn't confirm whether anybody was paid for these endorsements or not, but they certainly were sharing their opinions about them. Well, today we want to talk about whether that's right. Should doctors or residents, medical students share their thoughts like this in this manner? Does it work against overall medical authority in our society to not take advantage of the power and respect that physicians are accorded? Are you diminishing respect for medicine if you start talking about your personal views, what the old guard and old school crowd used to worry about? Although again, that was pre-social media. And does it jeopardize individual professional reputation if someone says, oh yeah, I saw my doctor endorsing a product on social media or talking about some personal family issue, and I don't know if I want to choose to see that doctor anymore. Too personal. What about if you choose to go into politics? Is that a reasonable route to pursue in terms of sharing views about your political opinions? Well, all interesting, fun, and I think rich subjects, and we're going to have two guests who I think will give us a lot of interesting perspective on this subject. We're joined today by Hansa Bhargava. She's a pediatrician and a senior medical director for WebMD Medscape. And also Jesse Gold, who's a psychiatrist and an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Washington University in St. Louis. Both doctors have active social media accounts and they have lots of followers. So I think we're going to get some interesting opinions about how and when you express personal views. So Hans, I'm going to come to you first. Tell me a little bit about your online presence and places where you do share opinions about, I'll say, not medical practice subjects.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Arthur. This is a great topic and so very timely. So yeah, I mean, I do have social media accounts, both and in my position at WebMD, of course, I have a social media presence from that perspective as well. Lately, what I'll point out is that the American Academy of Pediatrics, who I'm a very active member of, has also taken a stance on social media.
Yeah, I did see that. I did see.
Yeah, so I mean,
and remind the viewers, what did they say?
Yeah, and so the AAP actually has a Twitter account and has Instagram accounts and has asked us as spokespeople to often take public health messages,
vaccines,
but also,
or things like that.
Yes, also be very active in the, in promoting vaccines and taking a stance against the anti-vaxxers. So for me, I think it's really important to use, I think social media is has two edges, double-edged sword really. So you can use it for good in terms of advocacy, and you'll see on my social media accounts, I do use it for advocacy very actively, but I do have some hesitation about using it for product promotion.
Jesse, you have a presence on social media too. What do you do? What's the extent of your opining and offering views?
Absolutely. Thank you also for having me. I mostly use Twitter as a professional resource. I started to use it as a way to actually promote some of my writings, as the freelance world likes you to get clicks on things. So the first reason I went into using social media was really like this awkward mix of self-promotion that I wasn't sure how to quite get into, and quickly realized that I really liked it as a platform to connect to other people,
So
especially
just to
other
be clear, you
yeah,
got in to help promote some of your
writing.
editorials or opinion pieces. Where were they appearing? Where does
So
that stuff
I
come from?
so I write popular press pieces for places like Glamour and InStyle, and because they're really aimed at the public and not as much at physicians, it really mattered that I was out there promoting them, talking about them, saying why they should be reading them. So that's why I went on it in the first place. I had private accounts before that. I was in the generation where Facebook was at my school, but not a lot of other schools. I had a private Twitter prior to having a Dr. Jesse Gold Twitter, and I still have a private Instagram. But when I think about actually talking about things on my Twitter, I view it very much through a psychiatrist's lens. So psychiatry still tends to be on the side of limiting self-disclosure in any manner. So I think we're still taught, try to mostly be a blank slate. Don't come up with things that could alienate any sort of patient. It's not about you, it's about them. They shouldn't be feeling like it's about you. So when I think about what I'm posting, I think about it through that lens, which is like, is anything I'm saying, if a patient saw it, would they say, I don't want to see that doctor, or that's too much information about that doctor? I think psychiatrists are still on this like hesitant path with using social media because of having such a strong stance previously to self-disclosure. I'm probably a little bit less afraid of that than some of my mentors and attendings were.
Yeah, so mental health does have that long tradition of the doctor should be more anonymized or more of a blank slate, as you say. I'm going to ask both of you, and Jesse, you can answer this first. Do you ever talk about it with your patients? Do you get any feedback from them about, your social media presence?
So more lately, it's been Googling me. They will sometimes know things about me from Googling me, like having read an article, or I have a website because I have articles and they've seen that. I see college students and graduate students mostly, so it tends to be cool and not a problem.
Mm.
Um, I think I don't tend to bring it up unless they've seen it themselves, because it's not something that I really want to be putting out there and making them know they can find if they want to find it, because it does give them a lot more information about me than they would have otherwise. So I don't promote it. If they find it, we'll talk about it. I had a situation where I was on a dating app and one of my patients was on it, and we had to have that conversation. But that's a product of the fact that
Yeah, you got to tell us, how did that work out? Did a date eventuate?
Yeah. No, I mean, I obviously did not go on a date with my patient.
Yes.
It's very uncomfortable because, like, again, like, you put what you want to put on that, and that's a personal thing. But
Yeah.
I'm also pretty conscious about not writing I'm a psychiatrist. I write I'm a professor. And if I see a patient and know they're a patient, I run for the hills pretty quickly. But it doesn't mean they didn't see my profile. So it makes it complicated, for sure.
What about you, Hansa? Do you talk about this with patients or prospective patients? I mean, would you like say, if you're going to see me, I have to warn you, you might see me on, Instagram or something?
I don't bring it up, just like Jesse. I don't bring it up actively, but I have had situations where somebody will say, well, I saw you, I saw you, you on the internet, or I do segments for Fox for public health information. I saw you on Fox and I saw you talking about this. So of course I'll address it from that perspective. I would point out that I think that, interestingly, there was a survey that was released about how, what percentage of patients actually go online to find health information, also go online to see, what doctors are in certain areas. And in fact, I think over 54% of millennials were searching online for doctors. So there's the other side of it where, maybe having an online presence might be good to actually drive patients to your practice. And so a lot of doctors are doing that, and I'm certainly not against that at all. But to Jesse's point—
Did you ever Google a patient?
No, I've never Googled
Jesse?
a patient, but Jesse, I'd be interested in your
That's a
answer.
good question. So for the most part, absolutely not. I will say emergent situations, it has happened. So sometimes in the psychiatric, like ER, if a patient comes in and is saying their name, but they have no other contacts and we're trying to get collateral or figure out where they are, there is a reason at that point. It's basically a phone book. We used to just go through a phone book and try to find people who are connected to the person, but we use it like that sometimes. I used to work in Silicon Valley, and sometimes people would say that they ran so-and-so company and we thought it was grandiosity, and then we figured out it was true. So those are the only times that I've ever done that. I've never done it just to see. I've never looked up a story a patient's told me if they were talking about a family member that was in the news or something like that.
So it's funny, I have a question that could bring our show to an immediate halt, but is worrying about social media something that old people like me are concerned about, but younger physicians and younger patients don't care about because they grew up with it? I mean, is this some kind of, old school, gosh, gee whiz, I used to not talk to my patients because I would have to use, Morse code and a telegraph to reach them? I mean, is that...
I think that's a great question because, 20 years ago, would our profession look at doctors who had websites branding themselves in a negative way? Perhaps. But now it seems like it's really run of the mill. I mean, there's a lot of great doctors who have personal websites and, I use that as a platform to do good public health messaging. So I do think things are shifting. And I just wonder, and this is why this topic is such a great topic, does the shift happen into products and politics? Is that okay or not? And 20 years from now, will we look like old fogies because we may be naysayers? What is that shift going to look like?
So let's go there for a second, Jesse. We've talked a little bit about using social media, having a presence there, using it as a megaphone, using it for public health education. But you remember when I introed the program, I said there was a Glamour magazine site with med students saying, here's the eye care products I like. What do you think about that, Jesse? Should we be telling the world, well, I'm no dermatologist, I'm actually, a cardiologist, but here's the eye cream I like?
That's a very interesting question. I actually saw that Glamour article and posted it on Twitter, and it was probably one of the most commented things on that I've ever posted from other doctors reacting. And it was sort of like two camps. One camp, like, absolutely not, this is ridiculous. First of all, what do doctors know about eye cream? Second of all, if they're endorsing it, doesn't mean it's a physician endorsing it, or even if they're a med student, does it add extra clout to the endorsement?
Yeah.
And the other side is med students are in debt and they're not making money, and we aren't giving them good loans, and we're not giving them good sources of money. Most places, they're in a lot of debt. So like the argument was, well, who can blame them for them wanting extra money? And they're not endorsing medical products for the most part. But you will look in these like Instagram influencers that are med students or nurses, and they're endorsing scrubs and they're endorsing like stethoscopes. And at what point does that kind of cross over? Eye cream is a little weird because if you're not a dermatologist, it maybe doesn't fall in your specialty and it maybe doesn't feel like medicine to you. But I do think it's the same thing. Like they asked doctors to endorse cigarettes in the past. They know what they're doing.
And they did, sure, a lot of advertising. I smoke Camels, the safest cigarette kind of stuff. Well, I mean, just to jump in there, and either of you can take a whack at this. I mean, endorsing an eye cream is fine. I'm not sure there's any evidence that eye creams do anything, right? I mean, there's that whole sort of oddball world where the cosmetic companies make claims about wrinkle removal or whatever age spot treatments and claim some science. I'm not sure it's always there. So aren't the medical students pushing the frontier of where they ought to be if A, they're not in dermatology or some related area, and B, they're out with a product that's kind of iffy? I mean, either of you.
I would agree with that, Arthur. I think that you really have to be careful about what you endorse, and it should be, ultimately, we are scientists. We have to use data and science to back up what we're saying. Even when and I know Jesse talks a lot about advocacy efforts in certain arenas, but both of us and all people who have a social media platform, at least most of the physicians that I follow, tend to use data to substantiate what they're saying.
They get uncomfortable if they're wandering too far away from what they read in the literature or
Exactly. And I think that speaks to the integrity of the profession. I think that, once you wander away from that, how are you different than, Joe Smith walking down the street who's saying, well, I like these headphones. And so I think that's probably the danger.
You buy that, Jesse?
I
of doing
do
that?
actually.
Mhm.
I think one of the hard things about it is there's this line between med student training, nursing student, and becoming and attending and having the cloud of like, what does it mean to be a doctor?
Right, I
Um,
mean, I have to intervene and say I'm not sure anybody within medicine cares what a medical student thinks about anything, but go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, that's a product of hierarchy. We could get into that another time,
Yeah.
but I do think that they might not realize exactly what they're doing. And in talking to at least my institution, I know there are no rules for endorsements by medical students. There are
Yeah.
for faculty. You know, you do disclosure forms, you do conflict of interest forms. They're not really doing that on students. So if this starts to be a thing where lots of students are doing this, or they want to make a statement about it, I think institutions are going to have to start teaching it, and institutions are going to have to start
Yeah,
talking about it.
I think that's a great point. I'll ask you, Jesse, first, and then Hansa. Did anybody mentor you or teach you or say anything about the rules or the limits of what it would mean to endorse things or offer opinions, let's say, when you're outside your specialty?
No, I mean, I think social media was sort of on the rise when I was in like college and then training. And I think people were using it, but not to the same extent they're using now. And I learned Twitter by being on Twitter more than anything else. And basically having a high bar for feeling comfortable about saying something. And then maybe over time I've gotten more comfortable expressing myself within certain limits. But I think that no one really role modeled that for me. One of my mentors from medical school uses Twitter and Instagram, but mostly privately and for things like running. So it wasn't really
Mm.
necessarily teaching me how to do it for medicine.
Any mentoring or words of wisdom flow your way?
Not really in medical schools or residency. Certainly when I went into practice, and especially as I met people through the American Academy of Pediatrics or other doctors such as Dr. Gold, that was more of a peer mentoring in that, they had established themselves. Certain doctors that I knew had websites and were actually leaders in social media for a decade or so. So, of course, that's someone that people like that who are science-based and use it for public health good are great mentors, but certainly no formal training.
So we've said, and I'm going to come back to this before we end, one rule to give someone who's thinking about doing this is stay connected to the evidence. Try to limit your opining to things that might be grounded in the science or the role of the physician that you're in. Still, there are personal things that happen. What about politics? Do you ever offer your political opinions about the glories of Donald Trump or the wonders of Bernie Sanders or whoever it might be? Do you go there?
I personally stay away from politics. I think it gets very muddy very fast. And so I prefer, again, to stick to the professionalism and to the science. So have I talked about policies or topics that might be looked at as political? Sure, I have. Gun violence being one of them,
And
gender
that
equity being
generates
one of them.
controversy, we know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And even gender equity
yeah.
generates controversy. Not sure why, but it does.
I
And
mean, would you go some distance, like if the president says, I want to cut Medicare and Medicaid or put work requirements into eligibility? Would you get that far down the
if
road?
it affects the health of the patient, such as healthcare reform, there was an issue around children's health a couple of years back. I'm sure you know, Dr. Kaplan. Those are things I will advocate for the patient. I will advocate for the person, and those definitely are science-based. So my personal stance is always that, and I've written blogs about this. It's not political. It's about health, and so yes to that. But
what about you, Jesse? Would you go down the road of endorsing a candidate or worrying about, Missouri policy on contraceptive availability or attempts to restrict abortion or whatever?
I always talk about the issue, not the person. So I try really hard not to say this is because of so-and-so president or this is because so-and-so legislator, because for me, that could mean that someone who believes in that person would never be able to see me as a provider. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing for other specialties. And I have seen people who have very, very, very big Twitter presence talk about politics, and it works for them and they like it and it's comfortable for them and it has made a brand for them and it works. But I've never really gone there. I definitely advocate for things also like gun violence and gender equity. For me, mental health is something I will talk about. So if anything that comes out as affecting mental health, I will discuss it. So for me, I also look to the APA and other organizations to see what they're talking about. So if the APA made a statement on the mental health of the children at the border, I might then say something, but I
So
might
that's
not have said
another,
it otherwise.
that's another interesting, perhaps, guardrail. Has the professional association that you're in taken a position?
Yeah.
It gives you a little more of a window in. All right, so I got a different question.
Okay.
What event or posting or phenomena that you were involved in do you regret? Have you had a social media, a Twitter that you think, oh, I wish I'd never said that, or I wrote for Glamour and people ran around saying, I don't really care what shoes you buy, or what's been something that you at least hesitated over, if not regret? Hansa first.
I shouldn't say I have no regrets, because I'd have to look through all my posts and to truly answer that question. But generally speaking, I do use those guardrails of policy, our organizations, the professional organization in science. And so nothing comes to the forefront of my mind. I do try to do that. I'm not saying that I don't use social media as a platform for public health. I absolutely do, but I can't remember anything like that.
Jesse, you ever had a blunder or something you wish you could retract?
I mean, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind. So the first is that tone is missing from anything like social media, any kind of post. So sometimes you say things and think that they sound sarcastic or like a joke or fine, and you miss the intersectionality of the post, and you can offend people pretty easily. So I can't think of one, like a perfect example of that, but I'm sure that I've done that multiple times. I've also been, I would say, unprepared for the blowback of some things. So I wrote a piece when I was in residency about just inpatient psychiatry and sort of advocating for it, and the myths of what has been perpetrated about inpatient psychiatry being like scary, and let's make all the Halloween movies about it, and sort of saying it's not that scary. I understand why it can feel scary, but it's not. And I got so many messages I didn't expect that. It was probably naive on my behalf, because there are definitely anti-psychiatry movements that I'm aware of, and I just didn't really think about it. So that was really surprising. Whereas on the other hand, I wrote about gun violence, and I wrote about a bunch of my friends that have coat hanger tattoos that are abortion providers, and I expected blowback, and I actually got less than I did for the psychiatry post. So I think it's really unexpected, but it's something.
How do you cope with it? Do you just say that's the price of my being out there?
Kind of. I think really thoughtfully about what I actually write. I try not to alienate people. Like when I did the tattoo story, it was about the people doing the work, not necessarily about abortion, for the same reason I've said multiple times, which is I'm not trying to alienate patients, despite my own personal beliefs. And so I think it's just like getting a tough skin. I think you don't want to poke the trolls. So you're not going to get anywhere by replying and trying to defend it and trying to say, but you don't understand, read this piece of evidence. Now you'll totally believe me. It doesn't really work. I would say some social media personality doctors do reply to trolls and use that to create more conflict in conversation. It's never been something I'm probably that good at, nor do I really want to do that, but it works for people.
So you would both agree, I'm pretty sure, I'll let you answer, that if you're getting paid for your opinion online, whether it's a product or eat blueberries or whatever, that ought to be part of a disclosure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it should be part of a disclosure. Perhaps, as Jesse pointed out, medical students should be also held to that standard as well. And it would be a good lesson for them to learn, because truly it's about digital citizenship. At the end of the day, they may not know that they're going to be signing disclosures left, right, and center for every speaking opportunity that you have or anything that you do. But I do think that they should be taught about that. And I do agree that you should absolutely have a disclosure.
Jesse?
I mean, I think so. I think it's hard because there are definitely things that you endorse by yourself that you don't think is connected to your university, but yet all the time you are connected to your university. I can post in my profile that these views are my own, but someone can still Google and see where I work. So you have to be really careful about that. I think I agree with Hansa that med students should be included in the conversation. When it comes to then do you tell your patient what you're doing, I think it really depends on what the product is and how it affects patient care or how it could impact patient care. Like, I don't know if you are endorsing an eye cream and it's just an eye cream and it's just makeup and it has nothing to do with anything that you're doing in work, that, like, as a psychiatrist, I need to say, just so you know, I also endorse this eye cream. But you might.
What do you make of celebrities who come out and endorse products online, healthcare? You know, I'm going to get this artificial knee. It's the best one for me. Plenty of drug endorsements out there. They're using their authority, if you will, and celebrity. Does that bother you, Hansa?
It doesn't really matter whether it bothers me or not. It's happening. And frankly, they're not trained with the rigor that we are. So I think sad, people may say this is sad, but they are held to a different standard than we are, I think. What do you think about that, Jesse?
I think they're using their platform for money and not necessarily for good. I think it's hard because they got offered an endorsement deal. They liked it. They maybe used the product once. It's their job to make money and be a person. So, like, I get it. But I think that they do cross the line a lot of times. There are definitely celebrity healthcare lines and products that are dangerous. And
I'll give you one that I chase around a lot. I chase Goop around. There are a lot of products there that seem to me not grounded in much of anything or could be dangerous. Do you guys ever spend time chasing that kind of celebrity stuff and trying to debunk it as unscientific?
I would say that there's one issue that I will chase around, and that's the vaccine issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like it when celebrities advocate for anti-vaccines, and I will chase that around. In fact, on social talks that we've done on Reddit, Reddit, there's been some anti-vaxxers who've come on and debated with me, and I'm happy to debate that with factual evidence, because it's something that is going to affect not just the patient, but the society and all of us at some point, as we're seeing with all the outbreaks. So yes, I will chase certain issues down for sure.
Jesse, you ever try to be sheriff?
I don't know that I have the authority to be sheriff in all forms of medicine. I think I don't particularly go after anybody unless I think it affects mental health, similarly to Hansa and choosing vaccines as her advocacy issue. I will support people who do go after Goop, though. I mean, there's a very prominent gynecologist who talks a lot about it, and she's really funny and really entertaining to follow and very smart and does it very well. And I think
that's Jen Gunther, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I know her. Yes.
And I'll comment on what she's saying or repost what she's saying, but sometimes I even unclick to actually reply to Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow because I just don't want to get into it and just reply to Jen. But I do think, someone needs to be doing it, and I'm really glad she is.
So I'm going to end by asking each of you to talk to me. I'm a medical student. I'm thinking about, I like talking to the public. Part of the reason I got into healthcare was to not just see patients, but also to advocate for health promotion and to advocate for science-based, let's say, lifestyle. Should I do it? What should I worry about? What you weren't mentored. Mentor me, Hansa.
Sure. I would say that it's very important to stick to the science when you talk about products or policy or patient health. That's what we have been taught. And it also speaks to your integrity and the trust that patients and the profession have in you. So I would say always stick to the science as much as possible and always be clear and transparent about what you do. So you may decide sometime in your career to be a part of a food company or be a part of a cream company, but try and make that decision looking through the lens of science and always be transparent about who you are.
What would you say, Jesse?
I would say do it, but do it thoughtfully. So I think I teach a class actually on media advocacy and literacy. That's an elective to med students here. And we had a social media class and we had a long conversation about this. And one of the things that came up was that over time, when you're not a resident or you're not in a hierarchical position where you feel like you don't know enough to talk, you get more and more comfortable about talking. but it's okay to not jump to being the forefront advocate for something as a med student or resident. Like, it's okay to tiptoe into social media and see what other people are doing or ask someone for help. I think that's absolutely okay. But I do think that it might end up being a necessity in the field, because I just submitted a journal article. They asked what my Twitter handle was. My sister's a researcher. She's never used social media. She's about 8 years older than me, but she only does research, and they told her she needed a Twitter account, and I've been basically teaching her how to Twitter. So I think that there's going to be very rare occasions where they're not going to want you to be doing this anymore. So I think you have to learn. I just do.
Well, I'm going to thank both Jessica Gold and Hansa for really enlightening me and hopefully the audience on the ins and outs of social media. I'm laughing to myself because I think one thing we have clearly established, the old school view that you keep your opinions to yourself is so dead as to be rotting. I mean, it's just, we're not going back there. Whatever the basis was for that position, it's gone. The presence of social media has just undermined it completely. And if you want to, influence public opinion and stand for the dissemination of good health and science, it's probably going to be through these social media outlets. At the same time, we need more training, we need more mentoring. It's good to have some more policies established, even demanding transparency about getting paid. So I think there's work to be done, but I have certainly become very clear that we're not going back.
I don't think so.
Mark Kaplan for Both Sides Now. Thanks for watching.